Okay, so my talk is titled Singing the Sonoran Desert, Environmental Knowledge and Conservation Efforts Among the Concaac People. I am an environmental anthropologist. I have roughly 13 years of experience, of ethnographic experience in the borderlands of US, Mexico, specifically in the Sonoran Desert and the Gulf of California. So what I'm going to present to you here is one of the core arguments of what has been my research and my passion in this area for many years. So let's get to it. I'm going to talk about environmental knowledge, but I need to depart with Durkheim, with Emile Durkheim, which is the founder of sociology and many other disciplines, right? Where Durkheim says, therefore, thought has at its aim not the reproduction of a given reality, but the construction of a future reality. Durkheim was trying to make the point in that text about how primitive people, so-called primitive people, they don't actually discern their environment because they need to, right? The rationalist, positivist Western take on primitive people had it that they need to know to survive, right? And they only know because they need to. Durkheim is trying to make the point that actually that is not true. That it's out of just curiosity that you actually learn about your environment. Mere human curiosity, just like us, right? And in that sense, there's really no point of divergence. There's no difference. More importantly, it's just a baseline. Knowledge is not something static. And environmental knowledge for a long time, especially in the 90s, was considered like this static thing, traditional ecological knowledge, right? Stagnant in time, where we just go to these communities trying to be nice and record the knowledge that they have, making all these catalogs. And we are missing the point, a crucial point that I'm going to make today, and I hope that actually sinks, which is that we can only really understand knowledge as it is encountered in practice, right? More importantly, that knowledge is not only something that involves reason, but actually that knowledge, as we know, it is laminated in uncertainty, it's laminated in emotions, it's laminated in existential concerns. That's what gives knowledge a grounding. So my talk is an invitation to rethink, as an environmental anthropologist, what do I mean by environmental knowledge? And finally, a point that I want to make following Durkheim is that knowledge is invested with power, right? It's never just isolated. Rambunctious garden. The Sonoran Desert, right? It encompasses at least 7 regions, 100,000 square miles, covering encompassing 2 countries, and 5 states. Paul Robbins uses the notion of rambunctious garden to precisely talk about this ecosystem that on the one hand is untamed, right? And on the other is highly managed and has been highly managed by humans for a long time. That is at the intersection of the Anthropocene. And that's where I am locating my research. The core of my research is trying to make a synthesis between what is the social ethos and the environmental ethos, right? Finding all sorts of cross tensions between wilderness and humans, between landscapes that are managed and other than humans that are also managed, and so forth and so on. So in terms of biodiversity, the Sonoran Desert is an incredibly biodiverse space because it not only encompasses all these numbers of species that we're seeing here, but also it, at its heart, finds the Sonoran Desert, the Gulf of California, right? What Jacques Cousteau once named the aquarium of the world, where we have more than and we have many species to discover there, or at least a catalog, close to 6,000 nominal species and subspecies. So most of the Gulf is in crisis in terms of overfishing, yet the diversity is still there present, right? So you have this magnificent biodiversity environment that is not just that, it's much more than that. Let me just give you a brief overview of where this is. So we have the US-Mexico border, Mexico, US, and everything in yellow, basically, it's the core of the Sonoran Desert. Streb in 1951 differentiates 7 regions within the Sonoran Desert. But you have both Baja Californias, you have Sonora, you have certainly Arizona and parts of California. The region that I'm going to focus on today, it's what is called the central coast of the Sonoran Desert, which encompasses the Midriff region with these islands. You have this Bridge Island, and you have this area, which is where the Seri people, or Concaac, have resided for more than 2,000 years. Diok, that is called Tiburon Island. That is the biggest island in North America, and Mexico at least. And that is the ancestral home ground of the Seri. The Seri people have been in this region, again, archaeology is estimated, at the very least 2,000 years. So what does it mean? It means that you have a society that is living in one of the most arid regions in North America, where the precipitation ranges between 100 and 250 millimeters, which is nothing, right? And yet have managed to find in this environment a way of living that still nowadays they value and appreciate enormously. So this obviously makes the point that these people know about their environment at a level that we might never really understand, right? So the question is how we as scientists from a Western perspective can actually, to what extent we can understand the way in which they understand that same reality that we are interested in understanding, right? And that has serious implications for conservation. It has serious implications because usually when we fail to understand how local people understand the environment is when actually the conservation programs fail, right? So with that concern in mind, let me show you the richness of these people's understanding of the world. Again, the Concaac had lived in this region for a number of centuries. The colonial process was rather brutal for them. They were, 2 minutes on that. There were different hunter-gatherer bands or subdivisions, right, that moved all along the coast of the Sonoran Desert, finding different niches, ecological niches, and actually these groups specialize in specific niches. At some point, when finally in the late 17th century, the first missionaries arrived and the Spanish soldiers, the inevitable result was a clash. The Seris were too untamed, too wild, too primitive to actually serve the colonial purposes of the crown, right? The interest of the Spanish crowd was to basically civilize all these indigenous populations as labor to sustain the mission system. The Seris refused this drastically and for the most part took refuge in the heart of their homeland for many years, until eventually the colonial expansion reached them and you have these wars of extermination. In time, at some point in the 19th century, mid-19th century, half of the Seri population is finally just killed. Spaniards will raid the Seri camps, killing children, women, men indiscriminately. And whoever was left from Concaac society, from the Seri, became a single group, right? And that's what we know today as the Concaac. But this is important for you to know, in the sense of what we know today as Concaac is the result of this colonial clash, where different groups with different environmental knowledges and practices eventually merge into a single unit to survive the colonial encounter. And so what we have after that is an era of disappearance. They disappear in Tiburon Island for a while and then basically reappear at the beginning of the 20th century. And now they start to deal with the Mexicans, always in tension with the Mexicans. But they managed to establish relatively stable societies, links of cooperation, and they start to do commercial fishing. And they start to do all sorts of things in the 20th century. So these are the Concaac people today. This is the young generation enjoying themselves in the sand dunes. They do commercial fisheries, just following their subsistence mode now. It's based on commercial fisheries. They have an exclusive fishing zone. The Mexican government granted them certain territorial rights in the 70s. So now they are they have this buffer zone, right? When they are they have ownership over part of this, what used to be the core of their territory. So they do commercial fisheries. They do wildlife management. This is my friend Emilio. With Emilio, I have worked for many years on the bighorn sheep management program that they have on Tiburon Island, which is bringing enormous revenues to the community and also a lot of problems. But that's another lecture. I'm not going to go there, just so you know the different things that they do. Also, Armando, who passed away sadly a few years ago, he was a great carver. They carved the ironwood of the Sonoran Desert to create these magnificent figures that represent the animals of the Sonoran Desert. You have seen them. You have seen many of these here, everywhere. They are everywhere, but they started there, right? With this simplicity that is characteristic of the Seri art. And you have the new generation. The new generation that, again, like with any indigenous society, straddles the world in many ways, right? Between what we call tradition and modernity. In this case, the girl is Olivia. It's at a puberty ceremony. It's at a puberty ceremony. It's late in the afternoon. The games are about to start. She's just chilling in her phone. But contrary to what, instead of having these palpitations over oh my God, technology is destroying these indigenous people, what she was doing actually was something different. So calm down. She was actually listening to songs, to traditional songs. Why would she do that? This is what she was listening to. Oh, or not.
La canción de Dios a la culpa por la trampa fundamental en la luna de la playa.
This is a quintessential traditional Seri song. They are very short like this. They basically are little haikus. Right? And they repeat the same verse over and over. In this case, it's a song about a fish bringing its food to the shore. Why would someone have a song about that? Especially, why would a girl on her phone will be listening to this? So, I'm going to cut it short. Why a girl like this would be listening to this? Go back to what I was telling you about. This is a society that moves from different ecological niches in different seasons, right? And this is a society that don't have a written form of communication. Therefore, songs are the quintessential way in which they codified environmental information. And that's the whole point of this lecture, to show you the richness of this society in which how they codified explicit, intricate, nuanced ecological knowledge, and the power that this has on the reproduction of this society and for conservation purposes in the future. So this is just a song that talks about Sierra fish bringing, it's a little bit more detailed than the translation, but it's just bringing that in this season the Sierra capture their food and come to the shore, right? Why is that relevant? Because then you can fish the Sierra. right? Because then you can fish the Sierra. So this song teaches you something about the environment, right? In order how to like navigate this world. Especially, remember, this is a world where you get like 100 millimeters sometimes or less of precipitation. So water is scarce. Many songs talk about the specific location of water in specific times, right? Same with food, like when actually you can find food where or where not, what to eat and what not, and so forth and so on. So songs are specifically, are like a great mnemonic device to transmit this knowledge. But there's something more than that. That's in itself fascinating. But there's something more that I'm going to push here today. And that has to do with power, right? That has to do with understanding of power. The Seri world, the way they classify it, they have this thing, sikh. Sikh is just a general noun to like classify a thing in the world, a presence in the world. And then therefore, sikh kisach, it means human. That determines humans. Sikham, animals. And plants. But then there's something else that I haven't told you. Isach, just a notion. See, notice here is this. And Isach means spirit in a way. It's those spirits that reside within the living creatures. Especially Isach are, I don't like to call them spirits because it's very loaded. They're just these entities that basically coexist in a parallel world to the natural world. And they basically, so you have, let's assume that this is the ontological realm of the humans and what you can see, and you have the Isach basically parallel in this world. In fact, many of these entities reside within certain animals, within certain plants, especially big plants, especially big animals. Because the Seris make this correlation in a desert that is scarce and very few things are large. Large things, therefore, are powerful. A leatherback, right? A bourgeon tree, creosote of magnificent. So a barred cactus, cardon, all sorts of things, right? So therefore, size and power make a match. Is that clear? Does that make sense? Yeah. So for the most part, Isach are minding their own business, right? They don't care about humans nor animals. They are just using them as niches, as ecological niches. But then we humans like trouble. We like trouble. So what do? Humans are trying to influence these little guys. Why? Why will they do that? In the traditional Seri society, traditional I mean the old times. Let's say in the old times. I hate the word traditional. In the old times, you have this process that was called an ekokum, which means to dwell in the desert. So the Seris, just like us, understand the environment in this basically divide, right? You have a social reality, the camps, and then you have the wilderness. And wilderness has a specific ethos and a specific way to be approached. So that is the Sonoran Desert again. Those are the mountains of Tiburon. And so what you would do with an ekonkum is you stop being in society. If you know a little bit about rituals, that's the way they work. You separate yourself from society, you go into this liminal stage where everything is uncertain, and then you seek for power. So a vision quester, right, will find either a place near the ocean where the whales could sing to him or to her, or a cave somewhere in the mountains, or especially the mountaintop, right? That's where you look for power. Why would you look for power in those places? Why would you look for power there? Because those are the places that basically unite. It's an interstice between two different realms and reality, right? A cave is a place between the in and the out, right? A mountaintop is the limit between earth and sky. The ocean the ocean shore there is like ocean and land again. So you want to position yourself in those interstices as a door. And then you knock at the door in a specific ways. I don't have time to go over the beautiful process that it takes. But basically, it's a process of several days where you fast. You only drink creosote tea. You play a bull roarer. Have you ever heard a bull roarer? It sounds like zzz, 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 zzz. And with that, you are basically knocking at the door of the spirits. It's like, hey, I'm here. So if the spirit, and you're fasting and it's a summer and it's hot, and you're starting to lose it, but if you hold, and the spirits consider you like a decent candidate, and this is something that you used to do when you were young, then on the fourth night, they will actually emerge from the walls of the cave or from the bottom of the mountain. And they will float around you. And they will actually talk to you. But, and this is important, fundamental, they will talk to you in what we perceive as songs. Right? In other words, for the series, songs are spirit talk. So, in that context, what you learn, the quester, what is learning, while the spirits talk to the quester, is these songs. And that's what you have to learn, those songs, because those songs are the key to actually, for a moment or two, eventually erase these and create an existential breach, an ontological breach between these two realities. And through these songs, those humans that have, the human with these songs will be able to manipulate the specific spirits that were granted to him, right? So, let's say in the old times, sea turtles were fundamental for this society, especially green sea turtles. Most of 30% of their diet was based on hunting sea turtles. But not everyone was a great sea turtle hunter, right? So the greatest, and there's a name, I'm forgetting, I'm blanking right now, but there's a name for a legend of a specific boy that was the best like sea turtle hunter, because he could read in this like reed balsa how the water flowed to the surface to see like the different currents, and knew perfectly where the turtles will take those routes in the currents, right, to trace them. And he will sing specific songs when hunting, and he will actually have a lot of success, right? So that's the practicality of this quest. It gave you power. You had actually the capacity to, a certain extent, manipulate your environmental resources through these songs. And that was fundamental for them in terms of subsistence. But also in terms of being recognized within the community as someone that was dependable, that you can depend on to survive, right? In that sense, power and subsistence were hand by hand. It was that specificity. So if you were successful, you will become an akokama, right? A person with spiritual power. In other words, an environmentalist. Yeah? 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 Now it makes sense? So, and that was great. All good and great. However, let's go back to the colonial process. As the series started 20th century, there's only a handful of them. They are on survival mode. There's marijuana and mezcal and tequila and like guns and constant conflict with the Mexicans. And it creates this constant friction and constant debt on both sides. So very few people actually manage to like pass this on, to actually have the time to take the time to go for a vision quest. So that system was already fragile. But in the 1950s, if that were not enough, you have missionaries from United States, from what is called the Summer Institute of Linguistics, right? That go there and learn the Seri language to translate the Bible. And in that way, the Seris are missionized, finally in the 1950s. What the Spaniards could not do for 300 years, the evangelical missionaries achieved by translating the Bible. And this is the case in Latin America in general. And so, with this missionization comes a punishment, like you don't do that, right? That is not what the Holy Spirit wants. That is not what you should do. But that has enormous implications, again, for the preservation of environmental knowledge, the transmission of an entire society that has 2,000 years of accumulated expertise on this land. So there's implications, enormous implications. Yet, somehow the songs remain. Nowadays, thanks to cell phones, right? The songs are still there, hundreds of songs. We don't have a full catalog of them. That's an entire life project. We don't have a catalog. But again, there are commercial fishermen. And the Sea of Cortez is a rough environment. It's a rough environment. Because you saw the channels and everything, that creates a lot of whirlpools, and it creates a lot of, like, especially when there's wind, it's really dangerous to be out there. Yet, they are out there. But then they are not out there just out there. They have songs to actually deal with uncertainty of the sea. This is my late friend Alfredo Lopez. He was one of the greatest people I have ever known. He had this curiosity. He proves Durkheim's point. He was just curious to pay attention to the minimal ecological details, right? About relationships between species, about when and what and how life happened in this environment. And he once told me this story about, like, constantly crossing to the Tiburon Island, and about being a sea monster down there that, like, in certain occasions will actually, like, eat you, right? So when the weather was rough, he will use songs like this to protect himself from these dangers. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of environmental knowledge in practice, right? Whatever he's meaning by this, I steer within the whirlpool, it means that if you have actually been in the Gulf of California and ridden with them, they know exactly how to cut through the whirlpool in a direction that actually propels you out of the whirlpool, right? And that's what this song is reminding you to do, because you actually find your center by steering in the direction of the whirlpool, and that saves your life from that sea creature. So that is just one thing that you do to, like, navigate life. And when the sentence "a thunder under the sea," it has to do with power happening. That for the series, this connection is always noisy. And you're gonna sing the next song. This connection creates thunder, creates noise, because you are actually clashing two ontological realms, two life worlds that usually are not connected. You are connecting the spiritual world with the environmental world, right? And so thunder is like the result of, I sing this song, I'm grounding myself in the ocean. If that's not amazing, I don't know what it is. And so sometimes you go out there in the ocean and you found a leatherback. That's a leatherback. I was telling you that sea turtles were important, fundamental for the study, especially green sea turtles. But leatherbacks were on a different quality. They were actually Seri people. They were considered to be Concaac. And in that context, when you found a leatherback out there, what you would do is sing to it, inviting her to come, to join you, so she would be allowed to feast. The whole community will celebrate her presence, because he's like an elder that has been out there for a long time and finally returns. And then you have to honor that, right? So you make this 4-day celebration where you build a hut and put the leatherback there, paint her with sacred signs that signal, like crosses, a transition between two ontological realms, dots, simple markers that says stuff is powerful here. this is something is happening in this presence, in this surface. The turtle is the medium, is the door for environmental power, and we have to honor that. So there's all sorts of taboos and restrictions that I don't have to go on into, but also part of the ceremony is men playing this gambling game where they actually bet money. And guess what? This idea, despite the Protestant influence, this idea of power is fundamental for this game, because this is a game about like you really concentrating, as you will concentrate in a cave, and really like seeing beyond what is obvious, to actually like guess where the winning stick is. So these men are like joking, and there's gossip about the community and whatnot, and jokes and talk, but it's a very serious business. They are basically, there's people that are really good at this game are considered to be very strong spiritually. Yeah? So are you seeing now how it's not just one dimension? Environmental knowledge actually is grounded in multiple layers that actually go from the emotional quest of going out to the desert, to the unknown, to like just daily life, where actually I can use it to deal with others. So that's what happened. Sadly, things happen, and this leatherback actually had already drowned when they found it. It was in a chinchorro. It was in a hook, and when they arrived, it had already drowned. Nonetheless, the last ceremony for a leatherback that took place in this area with the series was in 1985. So this was 4 years ago. This was the first, again, animal that you had like of these, and a whole generation of young kids were like for the first time seeing and listening to the songs that you are supposed to elicit when you find this elder. This is a song that had not been actually sung for a leatherback in 30 years. And that day, it was sung in the morning when the ceremony, after 4 days, the ceremony was concluding. That's when you sing that song. That's when you close the bridge between two ontological realms and power is distributed in the community. Oh. Is that correct? Yeah.
Het kunstmiddel met ankitaal geconstateerd maar gezegd het kunstmiddel dat voor aanbiedingen de toepassing en moet caminar en desierto la carrera mirada hacia el horizonte una vuelve hacia el cielo las maravillosas virtudes de canciones. Antilla Villa
So that's poetry, right? And that resembles what I was telling you in terms of the ekokum, right? This process where you go to the desert to look for power, and that brings you sea turtles, the great sea turtles. Right? You raise your hand, and once again, you touch the sky, you connect those realms, thunder happens, and then you have power. But, just to conclude and wrap up, a year later, the song actually was heard again. They actually captured another one, and this time was alive, well and alive, and they invited her to come, and the whole community was like dazzled. They brought her, wait, that's important for a reason. And usually, as you noticed in the previous slide, the leatherback has to be released at dawn, when the sun is rising on the 4th day, and not before. That's the ritual script, right? That's what has been done for 2,000 years, let's say, at least 1,000 years. Yet, Betsabe, the girl in the middle, and Saul Molina, this is his dad, her dad, are releasing the leatherback before actually the ceremony is concluded, before that song that you heard is sung. Why? Because Betsabe, it's actually has been part of a Grupo Tortuguero, of an environmental group in the community with the with the support of Ocean Revolution, that has been funded for Ocean Revolutions for a number of years, that actually monitor sea turtles in the Strait of Inferno next to Tiburon Island. And so you have these young series that for a number of years are also learning environmental science. And so this changes, and this actually puts us here, right? In terms of, in this interest is when ritual says something. Ritual, that is what is supposed to happen. And yet, there's another new set of concerns for these people in terms of what do I do if actually the leatherback might die? And I don't want the leatherback might die. So let's honor it in our way, but she actually like fought with her dad for like an hour in terms of we had to let her go. We have to let her go. And sure enough, Saul Molina let her go, right? And the ceremony followed with, and was concluded without the leatherback. So this is when we release her. So you can see the beauty, right? It's just marvelous animal. It was still a juvenile instead of massive and heavy. She was tired, but she was okay. Creosote, which is what you make a tea out of, you make the tea of creosote to like go to the vision quest. So this plant again is everywhere. Once you start connecting the dot, all this knowledge is intricate, it's rich, it just like speaks at multiple levels. It just never, the connections are endless once you start making the connections. But that takes years of environmental work. And so a new generation, right, of young kids for the first time in 30 years, seeing this animal, and again, knowledge that otherwise would be just like out there sitting, like, you know, just a few elders will know, out of the sudden is revitalized, is put into practice, and then a new generation incorporates the songs, makes them their own, but it has to be there. Just as Alfredo in his boat, like sailing the ocean, right, sings the songs that he needs to make it to the other side, this generation sings the songs of a letterback that will make them go to the next generation, get to the next generation. And again, we go back to the cell phones and technologies, right? And this stupid divide that is not actually makes sense in terms of, traditional versus modern. There's no such a thing. It's just in our mind, right? It's both and nothing at the same time. Now these young guys like posting then all these pictures on Facebook with all his friends, and therefore, you know, there's this like new level of sharing, not just on anymore through songs, but through Facebook, which is kind of cool. I apologize for the close-up of me. Let me feel it were. This is her. And it's just beautiful to see the young man just relating to this species and connecting. Thunder, remember? Thunder. So, just to wrap up, this is a larger conversation, but I am interested in, as an environmental anthropologist, start to dialogue with many of you in terms of the work that you do as environmentalists and conservationists, as biologists, as people that care, and to start like bridging that stupid divide between the social and the environmental in ways that actually make sense. We see the world very differently. We approach it with very different methods sometimes. We have very different interests. But I think the dialogue is fundamental for us for the future, because these people are teaching us that lesson, right? It cannot just be one monologue. It cannot be just one way to do things. You have to find synthesis. And these people, you saw it through the cell phones, the letterback, the change of the ritual script, are finding a synthesis that is meaningful for the future. Let's go back to Durkheim, right? Knowledge, or Durkheim, or what Alfredo told me, right? In the sense of expertise, environmental expertise is not about you knowing about this plant or that current or that fish is about the baseline of knowledge that you have to deal with uncertainty, to deal with the unknown, when actually you are challenged out there in the desert to survive, and then that baseline actually makes you make sense of what you're going to do in the next step, or as Durkheim would say, in the future reality. Yeah? Thank you so much.